welcome to Ruth's Journey, part 5 now. Welcome if you haven't been here before. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and I have been doing a series of teachings on the Book of Ruth, and this is part 5. So this takes us up into chapter 4. So we'll recap first of all chapter 3, not the whole thing, just a little bit at the end, and then we'll go on into Ruth chapter 4. Okay, so let's go for it. Brilliant. So when we first begin, we will begin with the part in Ruth which is from chapter 3 verse 18. Okay, so we'll just look at the little bit before that, because I like to do that, just look at a tiny bit before and then go on from verse 18. Okay, so when Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything that Boaz had done for her, and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." I'm just going to read that little bit again. Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." So wait until the matter is settled. How it turns out is what she's going to find out. He won't rest until it's settled today. So Ruth had done everything already that Naomi had instructed her to do, and she'd approached Boaz, she'd placed herself at his feet, and she asked him to spread his covering over her. Okay, she trusted him as her kinsman redeemer, and Boaz had responded with integrity. He had promised Ruth, "I will redeem you." But there was still one matter that needed to be settled. There was another redeemer who was nearer than Boaz, actually. And he has no name, which is really interesting. Ruth had done what she could do, and Boaz had to do what only he could do. And so Naomi says, "Wait, my daughter." And we're going to look a little bit at why that was a very significant thing to say. The art of waiting can take a great deal of strength. It may seem surprising that waiting requires strength, but anyone who has waited upon the Lord knows that it can be one of the most difficult expressions of faith. It is easy to act when we know what to do. It is easier to move when we can see the way ahead. But what do we do when we have obeyed God. We've prayed, we've trusted, and now there's nothing left to do except wait. Naomi understood that Ruth needed to wait, and so she impresses this upon her daughter-in-law. Wait, my daughter. The active waiting of faith. The word translated wait in this passage is connected with the Hebrew verb yashav. Yashav means to sit, remain, stay, dwell, or abide. I'll say that again. So yashav means to sit, remain, stay, dwell, or abide. So at first glance, this may appear to describe inactivity. But Ruth's waiting was not passive. She was not sitting in hopelessness. She was not sitting in resignation. She was not sitting with the attitude, there's nothing I can do, so I might as well give up. No. This was not sitting down in defeat. This was a remaining in faith. Ruth had already done what she was instructed to do. She had gone to Boaz. She had placed her request before the Redeemer. She had trusted his character. And more than this, she had obeyed Naomi. Now she'd reached the point where she could not do anything more. The matter was in Boaz's hands. And so Naomi says, yashav, sit, remain, stay, wait. But this waiting was not disengagement. It was an active posture of trust. Waiting is leaning into God. There is a difference between waiting and giving up. There is a difference between remaining and becoming passive. There is a difference between resting and resigning ourselves to hopelessness. Biblical waiting is a posture of the heart. It is an active leaning into the faithfulness of God. Ruth was not leaning into her own understanding. She was not trying to force the outcome. She was not running ahead of Boaz. She was not attempting to manipulate the situation. She had reached the place where her faith meant, I have done what God has asked me to do. Now I will remain here and trust him with what I cannot do. I'm going to say that again. I have done what God asked me to do. Now I will remain here and trust him with what I cannot do. This is the heart of yashav. Ruth was remaining in a posture of expectancy. She was waiting for the matter to be settled. She was waiting for the Redeemer to act. She was not leaning away from God. She was leaning into him. Faith sometimes looks like leaning. We often think of a faith movement, and sometimes faith absolutely requires us to move. Ruth had to leave Moab. She had to go to Bethlehem. She had to glean in the field, and she had to approach Boaz. She had to speak. She had to obey. But now, the act of faith was not movement. The act of faith was remaining. Sometimes faith looks like walking. Sometimes faith looks like speaking. But sometimes faith even looks like stepping out. And sometimes faith looks like sitting still because God has said, wait. Yashav. This is not inactivity. This is obedience. Ruth was leaning into the leading and guiding of God. She was saying, in effect, I will not run ahead of the Redeemer. I will not try to complete what only the Redeemer can complete. I will remain where I have been instructed to remain. I will trust that the one who has promised to redeem me will do what he has said. This kind of waiting requires enormous trust. So let's delve into that little bit. Waiting requires trust. We cannot truly wait upon someone who we do not trust. If we do not trust the character of the person who has promised to help us, waiting becomes anxiety. But Ruth trusted Boaz. She had seen his character. She had even experienced his kindness. She had witnessed his integrity, and she knew that he was a man who kept his word. Therefore, she could wait. Her waiting was built upon relationship. And this is true of our relationship with Abba. We can wait because we know him. We can remain because we know his character. We can trust because we know he is faithful. We can lean because we know he will not let us fall. Waiting upon God is therefore not merely waiting for an event. It is waiting upon a person. It is waiting upon Abba. Waiting and faith work together. Faith and trust work together. Faith says, God has spoken. Trust says, therefore, I can remain while I wait for him to fulfill what he has said. Faith says, God has promised. Trust says, therefore, I do not need to force the outcome. Faith says, God is leading. Trust says, therefore, I can follow his timing. Ruth had already received the promise of Boaz. Now she had to trust him to fulfill it. She had to wait until she knew how the matter would turn out. The waiting was therefore an act of faith. Until you know how the matter turns out. Naomi says, wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out. The waiting was not for nothing. The waiting was unto something. There was a matter being settled. There was a redeemer at work. Ruth did not yet know how the matter would turn out, but Boaz did. And this is where trust becomes so important. We may not know how the matter will turn out, but God does. We may not see the way forward, but God does. We may not understand the delay even, but God does. We may not know what is happening behind the scenes, but God does. Ruth was being asked to trust the character of the Redeemer while she waited for the outcome of the redemption. The leaning of faith. There is a holy posture in which we lean into God. We lean into His word, we lean into His promises, and we lean into His leading. We lean into His timing. We also lean into His character, and this leaning requires trust. If we are leaning upon something, we are trusting it to support us. We are no longer depending entirely upon our own strength. And this is what waiting upon God requires. It requires us to stop holding ourselves up by our own strength and to trust that Abba will sustain us. The world may say, take control, but faith sometimes says, remain. The world may say, make it happen, but faith sometimes says, trust God. The world may say, if you do not act immediately, everything will be lost. But faith says, God is not late. The stillness of yashav. Ruth's yashav was a stillness filled with expectation. She was not spiritually asleep. She was not disconnected. She was not abandoning hope. She was waiting with her heart turned towards the Redeemer. This is an important picture of prayer, actually. Sometimes we pray and then immediately try to take control of the outcome, don't we? But there comes a moment when we must say, Abba, I have brought this to you. Now I will trust you with it. This does not mean we stop caring. It does not mean we stop believing. It does not mean we stop listening. In fact, the opposite is true. We become more attentive. We become more sensitive to His leading. We remain steady. We wait for the next instruction and we lean in. Waiting is active readiness. Ruth's waiting was active because she remained ready. She did not know exactly what would happen next, but she was prepared to respond when the matter was settled. This is the difference between biblical waiting and passivity. Passivity says, I don't care what happens. Biblical waiting says, I trust God with what I cannot control, and I remain ready to follow when He leads. Ruth was waiting with expectation. She was waiting with hope. She was waiting with trust. She was waiting with faith. She was waiting for the Redeemer to complete what she could not complete herself. Waiting upon the Lord. The scriptures repeatedly call God's people to wait upon him. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. Psalm 27:14. Notice that the command to wait is connected to strength and courage. Waiting is not weakness. Waiting requires strength. Waiting requires courage. Waiting requires the ability to remain when everything within us wants to just run ahead. Lamentations 3:26 says, "It is good that he waits silently for the salvation of the Lord." This kind of silence is not emptiness, it is trust. It is the silence of a heart that has cried out to the Lord, cried out to God, and now rests in his faithfulness. Waiting for redemption. Romans chapter 8 verse 23 reminds us that we are waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons and daughters, the redemption of our body. The people of God are a waiting people. We wait for the fulfillment of promises. We wait for restoration. We wait for the return of the Mashiach. We wait for the redemption of our bodies. We wait for the day when all things will be made new. This waiting is not hopeless. Biblical waiting is not passive despair. It is active trust. It is the posture of someone who believes that God is faithful. The delayed bridegroom. Yeshua taught, "Now while the bridegroom was delaying, they all became drowsy and began to sleep." And that was taken from Matthew chapter 25 verse 5. You might recall that was the parable of the 10 virgins. The bridegroom appeared to be delaying, but he had not forgotten his promise. The delay was not abandonment. The delay was not failure. The delay was not evidence that the bridegroom was never coming. The wise virgins were prepared to wait. They had oil. They were ready. They understood that the bridegroom could come at any moment. The people of God must therefore be careful not to grow weary in waiting. We must not faint. We must not abandon hope. We must not assume that because we cannot see anything happening, nothing is happening. The bridegroom is coming. The promised will be fulfilled. He will not rest until he has settled it today, is what Naomi says. Naomi continues, "For the man will not rest until he has settled it today." This is the voice of reassurance towards Ruth from her mother-in-law. Naomi knew the character of Boaz. She knew that once Boaz had committed himself to redeem Ruth, he would not rest until the matter had been settled. The Hebrew word connected with the idea of completing or bringing something to its conclusion is kala, and it carries the sense of bringing something to an end, completing it, finishing it, or bringing it to fulfillment. Boaz would not begin the process and then abandon it. He would not make a promise and then forget it. He would not start the work of redemption and leave it unfinished. Naomi knew Boaz will finish what he has begun. This is a powerful picture of the faithfulness of God. God does not abandon what he begins. The Apostle Paul writes, "For I am confident of this very thing, that he who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Mashiach Yeshua." Philippians 1 verse 6. God does not begin a work and then abandon it. He does not start redemption and leave us halfway restored. He does not call us and forget us. He does not make promises and then become unable to fulfill them. The God who began the work is the God who will complete the work. Boaz, in the same way, would not rest until he had settled Ruth's situation. And the Lord does not slumber or sleep. It is written in Psalm 121 verse 4. Behold, he who keeps Yisrael will neither slumber nor sleep. While Ruth was waiting, Boaz was working. While Ruth was sitting, Boaz was moving. I'm going to say that again. While Ruth was waiting, Boaz was working. While Ruth was sitting, Boaz was moving. While Ruth was waiting to know how the matter would turn out, Boaz was already acting on her behalf. This is the mystery of waiting. We may be still, but God is not. We may be silent, but God is not. We may be waiting, but God is working. God has not forgotten you. Perhaps you are in a season yourself of waiting. Perhaps you've prayed for a long time. Perhaps you've cried out to God. Perhaps you've prayed prayers that nobody else knows about. Perhaps you've reached the point where there is nothing left to say. You've asked, you've waited, and now you are simply remaining. Let the words Naomi said speak to you. Wait, my daughter. Wait, my son. Yashav. God has not forgotten the day or the hour. He's not forgotten your prayer. He's not forgotten his promise. He has not lost sight of you. Do not lose hope at the last hour. The suddenly of God There are seasons when everything appears still. The prayers seem unanswered. The promises seem delayed. The situation seems unchanged. We've cried out, we've waited, we've remained, and then suddenly God moves. The stillness gives way to the suddenly. The waiting gives way to the fulfillment. The promise becomes visible, tangible. The matter is settled. And we realise that God had been working all along. This is the testimony of Ruth. She waited, Boaz worked, and the matter was settled. The wait was worth it. There are times when we may look back and say, now I understand. The nights weren't wasted, the tears weren't wasted, the prayers weren't wasted. The prayers were not wasted, the silence was not wasted, the waiting was not wasted. Every single moment of leaning into Abba's faithfulness was preparing us to see what he had been doing. And then we understand that waiting was worth it. Not because the waiting itself is easy. It's not. Not because we enjoyed every moment. We didn't. But because God was faithful. And that concludes my recap of what was happening in that moment at the end of Ruth chapter 3. So I hope that gives you some insight into the act of waiting and what was going on and what that looked like for Ruth and what it meant, really, what was going on in, almost in the spirit, and what was going on behind the scenes. And in the same way, what goes on behind for us when we are waiting, when God says, yashav, to us. It's hard, but the waiting is worth it. So let's go into Ruth chapter 4 now. And I've entitled it, The Redeemer Goes to the Gate. Okay, so this is what is happening next. So I'm going to read that chapter 4 now to you. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so that I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you, and I am the next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this the kinsman redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to another. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself." And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth, the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all those at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So I'm just going to go into a little bit now from when the Redeemer goes to the gate. So Boaz went up to the gate and he sat down there and he said, behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz spoke was passing by, and he said to him, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. So that's chapter 4, verse 1. So while Ruth waited, Boaz went to the gate. The gate was the place where legal matters were settled, as we've already heard. It was a place of public testimony, justice and covenant responsibility. Boaz did not hide. He did not attempt to redeem Ruth secretly. He did not bypass the proper process. He went to the place where the matter could be settled publicly. The redemption of Ruth would not remain merely a private promise. It would be legally established. The promise would therefore become a completed act. So let's look at the nearer Redeemer. Boaz called on the nearer Redeemer and gathered the elders of the city. The matter concerned the land belonging to Elimelech. The nearer Redeemer initially said, "I will redeem it," because it was land, of course, and land was very precious in those days. It is now, but even more so then. It was your life's provision, and your entire family and household, and everything really, income. But Boaz then explained that the redemption of the land was connected with Ruth. The nearer Redeemer would have to take Ruth as part of the responsibility of preserving the family inheritance. The man said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I jeopardize my own inheritance." He was willing to redeem the land, but he was not willing to bear the full cost. He wanted the inheritance, as anyone would, be honest. But he did not want the responsibility. He wanted the benefit, but he did not want the sacrifice. He had the right of redemption, but he did not have the willingness to redeem. Boaz was willing. Boaz was different. Boaz was willing to take responsibility, and he was willing to pay the price. He was willing to accept Ruth, and he was willing to restore the inheritance. Boaz was willing to take responsibility for what had been lost. This is why Boaz is such a powerful picture of the Mashiach, the Messiah. Yeshua did not merely have the ability to redeem, he was willing. He did not merely see the cost of redemption, he accepted it. He did not merely observe our brokenness from a distance, he came near. He became our kinsman. He entered into humanity, and he took upon himself the cost of redemption. The sandal of the witness, and this is something we read in the scripture, is done as a legality. In a act of redemption was confirmed through the removal of the sandal. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and exchange of land. To confirm any matter, a man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of testimony in Israel. Ruth chapter 4 verse 7. So the sandal became a witness. The matter was legally settled. The right to redeem passed to Boaz. What had been uncertain was now established. What had been waiting was now moving forward towards fulfillment. What Ruth had hoped for was now becoming a reality. Boaz had completed the process. So this is where the Redeemer then restores the inheritance legally. Boaz declares, he makes a declaration before the elders, "You are witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon." So in Ruth 4:9, Boaz redeems what had been lost. He restores the inheritance and he takes responsibility for the family. He does not redeem Ruth while ignoring Naomi. His redemption is comprehensive. He takes responsibility for the whole situation. This points us towards the greater Redeemer. Yeshua does not merely deal with one part of our brokenness. He comes to redeem completely. He restores, he heals, he reconciles, and he brings us home. Ruth is received. So Ruth is received now because Boaz continues on by saying, "Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife." In Ruth chapter 4 verse 10, that is. So Ruth is no longer simply the foreign widow. She is no longer the outsider gleaning in the field. She is no longer without a future. She is received by the Redeemer. The woman who had come under the wings of the God of Israel now becomes the bride of the Redeemer. How wonderful, how beautiful. The woman who had come under the wings of God becomes the bride of the Redeemer. Grace has reversed disgrace. I'll say it again. Grace has reversed disgrace. The outsider has been brought near. The empty has been fulfilled. I mean filled, moreover. The empty is now filled. The widow has been given a future. The blessing of the elders and the people say, "We are witnesses." They bless Ruth and Boaz. They speak of Rachel and Leah. They speak of the house of Israel, and they speak of Bethlehem. The story that began in famine is now becoming the story of fruitfulness. The story that began in death is now becoming the story of life. The story that began with emptiness is now becoming a story of abundance. The Lord was working through every part of the journey. So let's continue in the scripture now from Ruth chapter 4 from verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Yay! The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. Amminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz. Boaz the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse the father of David. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went in to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The Lord gives life. The Lord restores the future. The Lord brings fruitfulness out of emptiness. I'll say that again. The Lord brings fruitfulness out of emptiness. The Lord brings hope out of loss. The Lord brings a future out of what appeared to be the end. I think it's really important here, looking towards the end of the chapter, to realise Naomi's restoration in this story. I think it's very important because this obviously very much centres around what Ruth does and what Boaz does. This whole book is obviously called the Book of Ruth. However, I think it's really important, and something quite often left to one side, is the fact of Naomi's restoration. So the women say to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer today." So this right here is the reversal of Naomi's earlier declaration. She said earlier on in the chapters, "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." So that was when she first came back to Bethlehem with Ruth. She said this. It was a declaration she made when she entered back into Bethlehem. "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Naomi thought she was empty, but God had not forgotten her. God had been working through Ruth. God had been working through Boaz. God had been working through the waiting. God had been working through the silence. God had been working through the uncertainty. The women say, "May he also be to you a restorer of life." The Lord had restored Naomi's life. The rest she had desired for Ruth had become part of her own restoration. Amazing. She thought it was all finished for her, but no. The rest she desired herself for Ruth had become part of her own restoration. This is the kindness of God. Sometimes the blessing we seek for another actually becomes part of the blessing God brings to us. Isn't that beautiful? The line of David. This is the very end bit now. The child is named Obed. Obed becomes the father of Jesse. Jesse becomes the father of David. And through David comes the messianic line. The story of Ruth ultimately leads us to Yeshua, the Mashiach, the Messiah, the Moabite widow. "I will remain where you have placed me until you lead me forward. I will lean into you, Abba. And while we yashav, while we sit, remain, dwell and wait, we can be confident that God is not inactive." While Ruth was waiting, Boaz was working. While Ruth was sitting, Boaz was moving, wasn't he? And while Ruth was remaining, Boaz was acting. And while we wait upon the Lord, he is working. He is moving. He is preparing a way for us. and he is completing. He is bringing his purposes to fulfillment. All the promises of God are yes and amen in Yeshua. The God who began the work will complete it. The Redeemer who promised will act. The bridegroom who appears to delay is coming. And the Father who has never forgotten us will bring his purposes to completion. So, dear ones, I want to leave you with this. Yashav. Yashav. Sit. Remain. Abide. Lean in. Wait. Trust. Hope. And when the time comes, you will discover that while you were waiting upon him, he was working all along. Grace reverses disgrace. Love fulfills Torah. And the Redeemer is faithful. The waiting is not for nothing. He who began a good work will complete it, and the Redeemer will bring us home. Amen.